Now it is my great pleasure to welcome our host for this evening, Richard Linklater, here to introduce L'Argent.
Thanks, Holly. And I really look forward to talking about this film after, so please stay. I look forward to talking to Holly about it, especially. She speaks French and everything. She knows well, I'll run you through my experience with this film. This was the first Bresson film I ever saw. It came out in '83 and was a big deal. It won prizes at Cannes and big international hit, but it trickled into Austin, I think, in spring of '84. It played at Hogg Auditorium, and back then they just play a film all weekend, maybe 4 times, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 2 times on Sunday. And I went to this Friday night. I'd always read about Bresson. I'd just really been into film for a couple years, and he had been a rumor, just something I read, and it sounded pretty rigorous films, but I was very intrigued. So, of course, I went Friday and saw this film, and I had really no idea what I was like, okay, wow, is that like, I don't know about the acting, you know, it's like maybe bad acting or something. And then, so I went again Saturday. And over the weekend I read too. This film's based on a little short Tolstoy, short novel, long short story, whatever that length is, that you can read rather quickly. And so I remember I read that, and I just kind of boned up, did my research, read a little more about Bresson, and then saw it 3 times that weekend. And by that Sunday night, my mind was just completely blown. Something clicked, and I don't know how else to put it. The epiphanies that I think he goes for as a director, and he's very specific. Bresson speaks very directly. His films aren't obscure. They aren't ponderous, or they don't wander. He's kind of the opposite of. I heard him referred to in there's this new there's like slow food movement. There's like slow cinema. People are talking about that. And he was referred to in slow cinema. There's a book, and they were talking about Stranger Than Paradise and Bresson, like related. And I would have to say, I don't agree. I think Bresson, if you see it, he doesn't have long takes. Everything's kind of outside the opening credits. His films really move along. They're very elliptical. He has his own language. He's one of a handful of filmmakers in history that you can really say, this guy created his own cinematic language. And I think if you have any resistance, well, how many of you are seeing a Bresson film for the first time tonight? I hope a lot, because it's exciting. And he, unlike a lot of artists, could really articulate what he's going for. He wrote one of the best books on cinema, published in the mid-'70s. I'm going to read one quote. I actually did a little, for once, instead of rambling, I thought it'd be, for Bresson, you don't ramble, and I'm trying to be elliptical and specific. So I have a quote that really tells you, and his whole book is these little aphorisms and little short statements, and he says everything in very economically. Okay, so for him, the name of the book is Notes on Cinematography. And when he says cinematography, he doesn't mean like director of photography, simply the camera. For him, cinematography is his language, what you can do with a camera, and what you can communicate with cinema. So, very simply, 2 types of films. Those that employ the resources of the theater, actors, direction, etc., and use the camera to reproduce, and those that employ the resources of cinematography and the use of the camera to create. Cinematography, a new way of writing, therefore of feeling. So what he's really saying is, he's kind of the only one really who can do his brand of cinematography. Every other film is the acting, directing. That's all the other films ever made. He's really here with the new language, and it's true. It is true. His style is unimitatable. I think he was kind of on the forefront of his own. I never think he imagined it to be a movement, but he was very precise. He was a good interview. He would talk very specifically about what he wanted, and he'll talk about the effect he wants it to have. I pulled another quote I found, and so he speaks openly about, because Bresson's considered a spiritual artist. He would be, there's books written about, his, religion and cinema, and he's widely seen in that way. But he talks here in this quote. He would like his films to be able to render perceptible to an audience a feeling of a person's soul, and also the presence of something superior to us, which can be called God. So he's actually, in his own style, trying to get us to feel in a way that really involves us. That's what I felt probably the third time I saw this movie that weekend, that it clicked in, and I realized I'd been invited into his special cinematic world. You know, like if you think of certain kind of music and unique composers and visual artists, you know, sometimes you resist it first, and then once you give yourself over to it for what it is, that's where the rewards come. That's where the feelings start flowing. That's where it starts to, you know, all make sense. So tonight we're all invited inside his very, you know, unified, specific, I would say perfect cinematic world. You know, every image, every sound, every performance. And for him, when I was talking about the acting, it's not, the performances he's going for are all the same. He doesn't consider actors. He didn't use actors. He called them models. This is what's kind of throws you at first, but when you realize what he's getting at, like an actor, it seems almost deadpan. They communicate, but there's no frills, no small talk, no, hey, how you doing, no greetings. He's paired his whole style, and that style includes the way he shoots a movie and the way the performances play, the way it's written, the way it just moves along. It's all part of just his language, and yeah, it's completely unique. You know, there's nothing else like it. But okay, so everything: sound, images, performances. No motivation, no intent, no acting. You know, so so what does that say? It puts it on you to kind of fill in all the blanks. It's not going to lay it out for you. An actor's not going to cry or, you know, tell you what they're thinking. You have to kind of discover that. And he leads you there. These films, like I said, it's not obscure. Bresson, all his films, he made 13 films. They're always very clean stories, very character-based. You know, he really, very specific stories he's telling. So, and for Bresson's, you know, elliptical, I hear a few more elliptical thoughts as we head into this film. I thought I would throw out there. When I think of Bresson, I think of sparseness, accumulated detail, glances, hands and feet, entrances and exits, a lot of doorways, a lot of close-ups of hands, a lot of off-screen space. A lot of what goes on in this movie is happening. Listen carefully. You know, a lot of it happens just off camera. Characters confined, often trapped by circumstances or cruelty of fate, sufferers in silence. No resolution, God's unknowable judgment. The modern world and capitalism is a disease, and money is the carrier. One character even in this movie says, money, or l'argent, you know, visible God. Bresson's last two films were probably his most despairing. The one right before this, in '77, The Devil Probably. All his films are about young people, generally. And it was also someone who was having, like a teenagers, who were just at total war with the modern world. And this one is kind of the extremes, how far we've drifted, I think, from the spirit. So, you know, L'Argent is a very modern film. It's set in, 82, 83. It's, you know, it's timeless. You'll see a few, you know, I think this film could be shot yesterday. You know, there's a few details, phones and things, but it's a very modern film and made by a 82-year-old man, which you won't even believe when you watch the film that this is made by an old master. But it's a, you know, I've said it before, it's kind of a perfect film. Just give yourself over to it. And for those of you, it's also his most violent film. So there's something. It's kind of his last film, and he didn't know it'd be his last film. He had other films to make, but he was never able to. He lived forever. He died at 99, I guess, at the end of the century. But yeah, he had another film. He remind me. I got a letter from him actually in '87. I sent him some stuff. We had showed 10 of his films here at the film site, and he wrote me back. It was really wonderful. But yeah. So enjoy this film, and we'll talk after. I really look forward to it. So all right.
We just really like to put our logo over the last shot of every film we
we
show
do
at the
that.
Marchesa. Every time you catch something we like to do.
Just to
No,
remind
sorry
you
about that.
Yeah. That ending, those people looking right back at us.
Yeah.
It's always chilling. That last, that murder sequence, it's unbelievable at the end. It's a lantern, an axe, and a dog, the most expressive.
And the sound, yeah.
Most expressive being in the movie.
Yeah, and the sounds of every door clicking and opening.
Doors, nails on the floor. Ooh.
One thing that's always, that Bresson talks about is that he, and you alluded to this in the beginning, you had a really great intro that pointed out a lot of things that I think are really important with Bresson, but one thing is that he doesn't give intention to his characters. So which allows that abrupt change to happen with Yvonne, I think, going from somebody who we don't expect to be a killer to very quickly into Hotel Moderne, of course, is where the first murder takes place.
I mentioned the Tolstoy writing it's based on. It's called the forged note or the counterfeit note, or the forged coupon or counterfeit note, two different translations. And it's interesting, where this movie ends is exactly the halfway point of that story. You should read it. It's fascinating because Bresson's choice to end here, because that story is all about this passing of a small act of dishonesty and corruption cascades into murder. And the perpetrator, he confesses, just like the movie, goes off to prison and has kind of Bresson's characters, they end up almost, Bresson's movies, Pickpocket and so many, there's kind of this epiphany, there's this grace note. Well, this film, you have to reach pretty far to find it. It happens after, if you follow the story, and that's, I think he intentionally ends it there. But in the story, he kind of comes back, sort of a saint. He does good deeds that set off a contagion of good, of like beauty and goodness. Tolstoy is very moralistic. It's later writings like that. He was kind of writing for the masses, things peasants, everyone could understand. But it's a wonderful story. It's so interesting that it's like the halfway point.
Yeah, and I think that
It should have a sequel. Get the guy.
Yeah.
He comes out of prison. Damn it, that'd be a good movie.
Exactly. So with the characters who he sets in motion, there's one thing also with Bresson where there's so many things that he seems to be enamored by or interested in that you can't really nail it down. And there's that spirituality that creeps in that's so important in the earlier films. It's just sort of lingering around the edges, and you particularly notice it with in the prison scene with his last roommate, who seems to have this greater philosophy and wants to seem to guide him in the right direction. Of course, that doesn't happen.
Preaching. No, it sure doesn't. My favorite guy, I like Lucian. He's kind of the great.
And the way his character ends too is wonderful. Where it happens all off screen, and we just hear it in the background in the prison. Lucian is of course, the first young criminal guy, the Robin Hood character. Yeah,
all his theories. And this film tonight seemed to me, I've seen it a bunch over the years, and God, it felt like it was about 61 minutes long to me. It just it hits me even, I've seen it, I know it so well, but it just really struck out to me. The letters returned. Boom. You're in the mess hall at the prison. They give him shit. Boom, a little violence. Solitary, saves the pill. Off-screen, suicide attempt. It's just like everything just jumps past the conclusion into the next. It's really unbelievable.
It's an incredibly tight film, and that's where I think you're absolutely right with where you're talking about people put him in the slow category. It's absolutely the opposite.
Yeah, it's really the opposite. I can't think of someone who packs in more narrative just through those ellipses. It's the greatest use of like off-screen ellipses and storytelling. It's really, it's unbelievable. You know, I guess because I was getting to know both filmmakers at the same time, Tarkovsky and him, who he ironically shared with Nostalgia in that same year, '83 at Cannes. They shared the top award, I think, or something. And you can go on YouTube and actually see it. This is an incredible moment that the French are actually booing Bresson. Orson Welles is giving him the award. So you've got Welles, Tarkovsky, and Bresson on stage. You know, the last few years of those two guys' lives. You know, like I said, Bresson lived forever. But yeah, it's and the French are kind of booing him, which he said he was proud of. He said he would have been very concerned if to be applauded by those people. You know, he was really, I don't think he saw movies. He was really in his own world. You read interviews with him, which are really fascinating. But yeah, I don't think he saw other movies. He was so stringent in his own cinematic universe. I think someone even asked him about Tarkovsky because, you know, he was such a giant, you know, at that time. And he says, Tarkovsky, yes, good, but he still uses actors. You know, that kind of. So he was hardcore. You know.
Well, that's I'm really impressed that you were discovering Bresson sort of backwards from L'Argent, and that you were able to be like, and now I'm going to make movies. I think this is like, he's the filmmaker who, you know, you're like, okay, no one could be a genius like you know. I think he and Tarkovsky kind of share that, where it's hard as an artist to be like, okay, now I'm going to make a film.
Talk about their own languages. Yeah.
But at the same time, great films are very inspiring. So
those two guys wrote the best two books on film, in my opinion. Bresson's, and they're very much like their own films. Bresson's Notes on Cinematography, which I mentioned in the intro, and Tarkovsky's Sculpting in Time, and they're both like their filmmakers. Tarkovsky's book, very flowing and poetic, beautiful prose, well written, just about art and life, and it's just a great book about art. Everyone should read it. Bresson's these little, just choppy bits that are just pieces of wisdom, insight, and it's amazing. It gets you thinking so different about the possibilities, you know, of cinema. But I mean, those two, like I said before, I think you can't really imitate either. You know, what's the point? You know.
Well, and I think that's why Bresson's he's cited so much for filmmakers as a real source of inspiration, because it is its own language. I don't know how many people felt who were discovering him for the first time with this film, that this is so unlike anything you've ever seen, or quite that way. Did people have that feeling?
Yeah, you kind of have to. I mean, just the shots, you know, like, where's the face? You know, the compositions. It's like when we first meet. Do you say Yvonne? How do you say his name? Yvonne?
Yvonne.
Yvonne, that's the name. You know, close up of, you know, the counterfeit note to boom, we'll pass it off. There's his gloves. You know, it's a while before we see his face. You know, we follow him, we follow his body, what he does for a living. We learn so much about him before we even get to the face. You know, they don't teach you that in film school. You know, it's not like that's not how you shoot a movie.
And it's also isn't like the first thing in film school. Oh, you cut the part where they walk in the door. You don't show that.
Cut out all that. All those transit. Yeah, just nothing's going on.
But what's wonderful here is all the doorways and passageways, and that idea that you were talking about at the beginning of moving away from the world of the spiritual, and we really see that in this very institutional world of the prison, and then just the way that people are framed in doorways and walkways and underground.
And to me, he's kind of saying the modern world is its own kind of prison, you know, its own kind of hell. If all you think about is money and greed, and you know that you can betray yourself and other people. I don't know. Whereas early films, you know, Diary of a Country Priest, if you're going to start with Bresson, I mean, you can go back to a few before that, but I mean, I think when people think of his career, it starts in the early 50s with Diary of a Country Priest, overtly about a religious subject, this kind of saintly young priest out in the provinces who's eventually finds he's dying of stomach cancer. And keeps a diary, so it's a lot of his voiceovers and it's his diary, you know.
And the theme of very humble people having a lot of grace, like sort of we see with the woman in who the axe is murdered, the last woman he murders with the axe. She's this very graceful, yes, why are you doing things for all these people? But there's a character like that in Bresson's films, always this person of this very humble person with a lot of grace and almost divine grace, but very challenged by the universe.
Yeah. Often it's the lead, if you think of Mouchette or Diary of a Country Priest. Everyone around him is treating him poorly, or Mouchette's being abused, but this 14-year-old girl is kind of pure, beautiful.
That's my favorite one.
I know. That's such a. They're all great. They're
All
all
right,
fantastic.
so let's get some of your thoughts on the film. Did anybody have anything they wanted to talk about? Anything that was very inspiring or very confusing or very troubling? Yes, right here.
Yeah, I've always liked his movies. I think this is probably the fifth one of his I've seen, and all of them are very constructive, but they're also very, I mean, for lack of a better word, shorter. Like, isn't Pickpocket's like 75 minutes long, I think.
Yeah,
Like that.
and not a wasted frame.
Yeah.
Pickpocket is just.
Yeah, and I feel like kind of a lot of auteur filmmakers tend to, when you think of them, they think of much longer movies, like 2.5 hours is the norm or something like that. And I think, I'm just trying to think of what other filmmakers. This is kind of two-part question. Like, what other filmmakers have kind of embraced the shorter format anywhere close to it successfully, and why do you think that it seems like most filmmakers who get to the point where they're able to kind of convey whatever they want have to do it in such long ways? Yeah.
Sure. So for people in the back, the question was about the length of the films, because Bresson's films are fairly short in comparison with a lot of great directors like Tarkovsky, whose films tend to be pretty sprawling and long, and why does he keep them so taut? Yeah.
Yeah, even though they weren't, actually Stalker, some of those were getting kind of long, but they feel longer. You know who made similarly taught, very different style, and also his own language, Buñuel. A lot of 81-minute films there, 85. He never spent any extra, he was telling a very specific story, and he just didn't spend any more time than he had to. Bresson, he's pared everything down so much. Why? He's crammed so much into a small, space that he's conveyed everything there. I don't know why it would kind of be antithetical to his whole thing to drag it out. It's so, it's in this is his last film too. He had score, or he might have a Mozart bit, like in Man Escape, like a refrain that plays throughout the movie for transitions. He was done with everything at this point. When you see when the guy is finally playing the piano, I think that's a Bach piece or something. You realize, there hasn't been any music the whole movie. It's like, holy shit. He had kind of disowned his earlier films as a score. Those were early works before he kind of realized he didn't need that. Like that was not good. Films
no, I don't need that either.
Yeah, you don't need any of that. It's just the images and the sound. For him, it all came alive in the editing with the sound and the image. That was it.
Right here.
It's funny that that's based on a Russian short story, because it seems a lot like the early black and white silent Russian films, right? It seems like Eisenstein or something.
Or Dovzhenko or somebody.
Yeah,
even the
showing
nature stuff, you think
like
about it a
all
little
the way
bit.
through, and the faces don't move. They just, when they show somebody, it's just what they are, and you just take it in, but they don't act, they don't do anything, right?
I know, yeah, you think of those Russian silent films. That's a good, I never thought about that. But yeah, a lot of close-ups of
just poses, right?
Yeah, and what a parade of beauties. He cast people just kind of on their aesthetic, how he felt they looked and how that felt. He just very intuitively,
like the Russian cast.
Yeah, they got real faces, real people, and they always seem kind of perfect, for what he's asking them to do. So.
Yes, right here.
Well, I always have a great time when I hear music, and I can tell when certain artists are inspired by other artists. And in this film, I kept being reminded of Brian De Palma's Femme Fatale, and I feel as though Brian De Palma was really inspired by Bresson, and with the sound and the symbolism and the twist, especially.
I know he was a hero to all those guys. I think
Question about whether Brian De Palma was inspired by Bresson.
Do you think he was?
I think all those, the Scorsese's, De Palma's, Paul Schrader certainly. He wrote a book that features Bresson called Transcendental Style in Film, Ozu, Dreyer, Bresson, which is it's a great book. He wrote that in, I guess, the early 70s, late 60s. But so they all looked up to him. Scorsese talks about him quite a bit, and I think De Palma, they were all in there, together. It's kind of a, everybody admired him so much. The French New Wave, even though he's significantly older than all of them, they thought he was French cinema. When those guys were complaining about French cinema, it certainly wasn't Bresson. It was the commercial cinema. They really idolized him.
Yes, right here.
This is my first time watching a Bresson film. I really liked it. I liked the way the cuts were, and like, for example, the character was introduced, like you said, before showing his face. I thought the actors were great, considering they weren't trained actors. And then my question is, I watched Rick's very first feature on 8mm film, and yes, something about that film kept popping up in me viscerally when I was watching this film. And my question is, did you see this film prior to making that, the one that you made?
Yeah.
So praise for the actors,
Yes.
even though Bresson kind of has a different relationship with actors, but the acting was good. But also, was your first film inspired by? And I guess
I think so. Yeah, I hope so. I mean, like that and everything else,
And I like
whatever
how
you're
much-
passionate about at the time. I mean, I had feasted on these films.
Right.
Like we showed these 10 Bresson films in 1 year, and
this
they-
was back when Rick was booking all the prints for the Austin Film Society.
Sure was. And they would come to my house like 10 days before we showed them. So every night in the living room, Clark, you were there. We'd just, crank up the projector and watch. I remember watching Lancelot of the Lake, like, maybe 8 times. Just every night we'd watch it. So the films would be around for a week, so you just watch it every night. You'd watch the same film over. What I did with in the Hog Auditorium with this, we did in my living room, for that whole retrospective. It was really unbelievable. I'd never been so it felt like a whole world had opened up. But you can't, you go to make films yourself and you realize, oh, well, you can't, it's just, you're going to follow your own instincts. But, and it was really cool. Like, people showed up, we showed those films, at that point we were showing it out of Laguna Gloria. And a lot of people showed up, we sat about 100 people. And, the whole 7-film retrospective did really well. And I sent Bresson, the letter I sent him all the press. And told him at this kind of medium-sized, I'm sure I read this embarrassing letter, but I just said, that, around the world in this medium-sized Texas town, we all watched and really loved your movies. And he wrote back this really wonderful letter. He answered a few questions I had. At that moment, he was supposedly doing his next film after L'Argent was called Genesis, From the Creation to the Flood. What would that have been? And he talked a lot about, animals. He made one of the great animal movies of all time, Balthazar, about a donkey. He did around the time of Mouchette. It's beautiful.
Which I just watched
His
White
treatment of
God last
animals
night. Has
is
anyone seen
unique.
White God? I feel like this new film, White God, I was like, this is, I just feel like there was just
It's a
such a great,
Balthazar.
it's kind of a Balthazar
Yeah.
story, but like, imagine if Balthazar took revenge on everyone
Oh.
at the end of the story. And so anyway,
I wish Balthazar would have taken revenge.
Yeah.
in
but he would
Balthazar,
never
but-
do that.
No. But, Balthazar's sort of like the counterfeit note.
Yeah.
Balthazar goes through all the
Yes.
tiers of
Yes,
society
yeah.
and corruption and redemption, But he uses animals so well. So yeah, I remember in the letter I asked him if Genesis was happening. And he said in the letter to me, he said he thought he was starting soon. You read an interview, it was really close to happening, but it just never did. He never got the funding and everything. It's too bad.
He would have been one of the older filmmakers, although he was surpassed by a lot of his.
At that moment he
yeah.
was the oldest, and they weren't sure. You know
Contemporaries.
how those really people of that era, they never knew what year they were born. No records. I mean, when this came out, he was the same age as Tolstoy, 76. But when he died, they figured, he's actually into his 80s pretty far. He wasn't born in 08. He was born in like 01. So he was old. He was old then, and he was actually older than people even thought. But if you're planning to live to 100, what the hell?
And he had been in World War II and had been a German
Had been a
POW,
prisoner of
right?
war,
Yeah.
yeah.
mhm.
Yeah, incredible life. He was a painter too. He really saw his art as painting. That was his background. And in the later years, he wasn't painting anymore, but he had spent all his youth, his early years as a visual artist painting. So they were always kind of close. And Four Nights of a
yeah.
Dreamer, not to be a total geek, that's kind of a portrait of him as a young person. I think that's the closest for like an autobiographical film he would ever get. His stories, a lot of Russians, you know, Crime and Punishment is the basis of Pickpocket. Four Nights of a Dreamer is based on the Dostoevsky, yeah. As is Enfant Douce is Dostoevsky. He usually had a literary source, but again, if you go back and read those sources, it's just pared down to an essential thought or a few lines or something. It's a jumping off place, but I think he was one of those directors who didn't really originate like the character of the story. He had to be inspired and then could take it. I don't know if he, you know, like a lot of filmmakers, you know.
Well, another,
Wells, Kubrick,
yeah.
you know, people they need to kind of find themselves into some kind of narrative, and then they make it their own. You know.
His background as a painter, I think, points a little bit to the way he looks at objects and deals with objects in the film, and a lot of people have written about that, his relationship to space and objects that you see throughout, just like when that skimmer goes sliding across the floor and then you see it for a minute, and that they just take on a kind of different meaning or poetic meaning.
I know, the violence behind that, just sliding, a skimmer sliding and hitting the wall, that suggests, you know, so much more.
Yeah.
I
You
think
feel like
my
that's the
favorite-
mind of a painter.
My favorite, yeah. When the guy's reading the newspaper and he's just walking, and then he realizes the cops have totally. So it's like, wow, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's such an odd little. It's different than most of the rest of the film, but it shows you that he's screwed. You know, so and they don't have to see it. You know, it's like.
So there's a couple more thoughts
This
right over
robbery
here.
is not going to work out.
Yeah.
The world, obviously, you talked about, it's really oppressive and cold and fueled by money and greed. And the people are so passionless, they even have a car chase that's passionless. And then, you know, the guy starts, the scene that really struck me is the guy playing piano, and it's finally some passion, and someone touches their soul, and then he gets interrupted by, like, the glass falling over. It's almost like, you know, the world saying, like, nope, you can't have that escape. You're still in this world. I don't know, just as a young person, that's really scary to me.
Well, if you think this is scary, watch The Devil Probably. But scary? I don't know. I think it's.
So the idea of the world being very oppressive, but I think it's each individual character has a different experience with the universe in Bresson's films.
Yeah.
You either have it good, or you've got it real bad, or you're making it worse for yourself.
Yeah, I just think there's, again, those grace notes that you find in his movies, to me, kind of absolve, like, all that. You know, everything that you were mentioning is dark or oppressive. I think it transcends, like, all that.
Yes, right here.
You have to go through that to get to, because that is, you know, that's the world. That's always been the world. It's not just the modern, you know, there's always been a modern world that has a lot of problems.
Roger Ebert has this really beautiful review of Ozar Balthazar, where he talks about how the donkey is this kind of human condition condensed into this very simple character. And it seems that all his movies have that character. And the beautiful thing about Balthazar is it's a donkey. It doesn't even need to be a person. But in this film, there's an equivalent character. And in all the films, there's always this central character who is dealing with this like oppressive kind of state of being.
Yeah, there's always kind of the screwed over innocent.
Right, and it's so
In every
simplified,
movie.
like his visual style and everything else. It's pared down to this kind of one.
Can I say something? When you're talking about Balthazar, I just remembered reading an interview, and he says it was almost similar to casting an actor in his movies. He talked about Balthazar. He was looking for a donkey that wasn't too smart, not too. Yeah, he wanted not a too clever donkey, just a regular unemo donkey. Isn't that hilarious? Anyway. God, I'm gonna watch that movie right now.
It's addictive, actually. I think Bresson is
It
totally
is. Once you're
addictive.
in the world, you go down the Bresson rabbit hole.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Rick, it's interesting about the second half of the story, untold part, being about redemption of the character, because from the very beginning, when the boy tries to go away from his father, door closes, his mother said, "I can't help you," door closes. It's like throughout the whole film, doors keep closing, and then there's a kind of like a lingering shot of the door, and it kind of suggests that someone's fate has just been sealed, particularly in the prison.
Yeah, you've been shut
But
out.
the very last shot, the door opens and they escort him out. The door stays open.
Stays open, and I'm
The
always
light comes out, right?
I'm always obsessed with that last shot, and that's his last image he ever did. Now that it's all over,
No door closing, no fate sealed.
and just something about those.
So it's the open
pictures.
door at the end of the movie.
Yeah,
if
they're
anybody
looking it up. The
didn't
way
hear
they're
that.
looking at the camera, so there's a stack of people there
Yeah.
over the AFS logo. Write it down.
It's actually on the print now. The AFS logo is on it, so everywhere it plays.
And also through the whole movie, he's kind of ignored. He seems like a sweet guy in the beginning, and he's alone in the court. His wife even kind of abandons him. But then at the end, in his last act, then the crowd is just there waiting for him, almost like he's a celebrity.
Well,
So the crowds are
when you
lined up.
kill 5 people, you're a celebrity. I guess. I feel, it's so sad, his daughter died.
Finality's not the door, it's the axe in the water.
The finality is the axe in the
Wait,
water.
yeah.
Before
That's such a
the-
great shot too, because you don't even know what you're looking at,
Yeah,
and then here comes the way the light hits the axe in the water. It's like, okay, wow.
like, I remember seeing this and wondering if the axe is Bresson's camera. It's like, I'm done with cinema. But
Is-
he really wasn't.
But he wasn't. He had,
more.
yeah.
But
he
there
had
is
more
this,
movies.
it's like, it's an ending.
Yeah, but
Actually-
this person was saying that the axe was the axe Bresson's camera since this was his last film, but we understand that that was not the
You
case.
could almost say every Bresson film is his last film. Think of the end of every single one of them, and you're like, if that was his last film, that's a good one to go out on. He did that every damn film. No one else could ever say that. He's like, wow, that last image of every damn film is like that.
So let's take a couple more thoughts. In the center, in the back, there's 2 hands. Whoever wants to go first.
I find it hard to think of another filmmaker who moves so adeptly between the sense of solitude, characters who are sort of locked within themselves, and at the same time, this kind of capacious sense of the way individual lives act on one another through chance encounters and circumstances. He could sort of do both of those modes really skillfully, and I think particularly in this film, they're both such integral kind of ideas to the picture that he's painting.
Right. So the idea of the self and sort of the power of the self, and then the effect of other people, and sort of this domino effect of the universe that has on every character. Both of these things are happening at the same time.
Yeah, how
is what you're saying.
intertwined,
Yeah.
and that's kind of one of his, his themes that people talk about is the whole predestination. How integrated we are, how integral we are to each other's lives, how much we influence each other. It's something to really think about. I think that's what he wants us to think about. Like the smallest act really means something much more.
And there is a little bit of tension between the decisions that the characters make and the universe that's affecting them around them. Yes.
The film, of course, just seems extremely just nihilistic and cynical to me. I'm just wondering, in your opinion, is there a lesson to be learned?
Okay, so a viewer thinks it is nihilistic and cynical, and they would like to know if there's a lesson to be learned. And you're not the only one who watches this movie and thinks that. Like, Bresson is criticized often for having a dark view of his characters, but not everyone feels that way. It's a spectrum.
I don't know. Let's show of hands. Nihilistic and cynical. What else?
One.
What's the other categories?
He's just French.
He's just French.
Nailed it.
He's just French.
French. Perpetual existential crisis. French.
But
he's a critic. He's a critic of, society, the world, and there's a certain moral. I think that's where he's considered religious in a way. He does kind of have a moral point to all his
nihilistic than reality.
all his movies.
he's less nihilistic than reality. Okay. I did skip. Okay, there are lots of hands.
I think it's nihilistic, or happen to be pretty young. I think you guys are young.
There's.
Embrace the nihilism.
I'm sorry, I missed the hand in the back, so I'm gonna. Yeah.
It's good that because it made me
really emotional watching this movie. This is one of the most exciting movies I've seen in a really long time. And so thanks for introducing me.
All right, that's wonderful. Yeah,
But I felt like with all the stuff that he takes out, that there's no distraction from the story, right? So like there's no music, it's just we're just moving along through this story, and he's putting these pieces together so well, and for me, like I said, I felt so much throughout because of the story though. There was no like frosting, you know.
yeah. You truly feel like you're in the hands of a master once you kind of try to convey that in my intro a little bit. Just like give yourself over, and he's taking you there. You know, he doesn't. I don't know. It's a really unique relationship, I think, that he has to his viewers. He's not screwing around. You know.
All right, we just have. I'm sorry. Did I?
No.
We have time for just a couple more, and I saw some hands that were up for quite a while, so I'm just going to try and get. Okay, right over here.
I think it would be interesting to see his take on Ayn Rand.
His take on Ayn Rand. Bresson and Ayn Rand.
Well, there's a pairing. Can I mention the 50 millimeter lens?
Yes.
That's just some of that sameness, that thing. If you really notice, there's not one camera angle in this movie that couldn't come from like the human eye. That's something you see in his work that's kind of unique. You don't see a camera above everybody or on the ground looking up. It's always within the eye range, and he picks the 50 millimeter lens, like Ozu and a few others. Just the 50 kind of mirrors the human eye. Kind of how we see, same kind of focal depth. All that. So there's he really pares that down too. He's not screwing with you visually either. It's very straightforward. You don't see a super long lens in the background, out of focus, and it's everything's kind of how you would see the world. Just saying, it's something that just part of his style.
It also gives incredible consistency to what we see. Yes.
One thing about that for me that struck me as different from the other Bressons I've seen is that usually I feel like his scenes only contain actors that are involved in the narrative, or a lot of the ones I've seen, they're so controlled that the only people who appear on screen are the ones who are like kind of involved, or they interact with the scene, or they're in a jury or something. And here there's like a few people who like kind of exist in the city, and there's some people who walk around in the background and they walk like normal emotional human beings that contrast so strongly with the character's kind of tightly controlled movements.
Yeah, I think his last two films, Devil Probably and this, they both exist in a very modern setting, urban setting. You always wonder, just right at the moment the action stops and the camera kind of glides to a halt, there's that extra walks by perfect. I even want to think, was that just happenstance or was that a featured extra? I mean, it has to be, but they feel so real.
Yeah.
The world that the film takes place in feels very lived in.
The control of the main characters feel all that much stronger because like those people walking in the back, suddenly like their kind of staid walks became much more pronounced to me than in other films where the whole narrative was so good.
One of my favorite shots in the movie, it never makes any sense, but when he goes to prison, when the letters are stacking up, getting returned, and then we cut and all the guys are walking in to the mess hall. Just the way that those guys walk, the lead guy, it's just something it's just, I don't know, it's kind of beautiful.
Yeah, that's the huge moments in Condemned Man Escapes is the march with the slop tails and the march.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, I think
he's taken those moments, he's making them, even less. I like the way his characters intersect, and sometimes, or they try to connect, but mostly they intersect.
Yeah. Bouncing off
Characters intersecting and not necessarily connecting.
A lot of his movies have very urban. Pickpocket's a very urban movie. They're on subways. The pickpockets are. That's. If you're looking for your next Bresson movie, for those you can't go wrong. Just jump right into Pickpocket. That's exciting. The sequences in that are
Well, this one
very
is
influential.
more like Crime and Punishment, though, actually. Kills the guy with the axe, and that's the end. Whereas the short story, it kind of is a different thing, the Tolstoy short story. It's,
Or, you know, Lucian, my guy, he's closer to the Crime and Punishment. He's going to do a crime and then spend the money and do good with the...
right.
He's
But
actually
the way it
is
ends is more like Crime
Raskolnikov.
and Punishment. The way he does this, and then he's caught, and it's like
Yeah, no,
that
it,
moment.
it goes
Yeah.
that way on, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to take one more thought from someone who hasn't said anything yet. I don't think you've. Oh no, that's okay.
I wanted to mention the motif of like things being different right underneath the surface of what we're seeing. Like most memorably for me right now is like the potatoes being turned up in the soil. But even the opening shot was like, you're gonna see this, no you're not. And then we just watched the credits, and it was the whole time I had this feeling of like what is this actually about? Because it's right beneath what we're seeing maybe on the surface. I guess made me think of like Ang Lee's Ice Storm, but also the audio transitions in this film. I know I've talked about audio before, but namely the water over the wallpaper at the very end.
So there's a feeling like something's happening right under the surface because a lot of the images that we see are just so quickly passing before us, and there's this idea that there's more there that we need to catch on to, and then also the audio transitions and the choice of the audio layering.
Hidden off screen, yeah. Your ear takes you somewhere else in a more expressive way, and you're just there to wonder, I think, a lot, or think about, what's behind it. But yeah, that's a great observation. I think that sums up a lot of his images.
Like if people feeling like this is nihilistic or something, I think a lot of what's beautiful right beneath the surface is actually maybe the most ugly thing. Nothing is what it seems, right?
Yeah. Well, you have to kind of work your way out of that nihilistic phase. I mean, you have to kind of, break through that, but you have to go into it to ever come out of it.
I think there's a lot of cruelty. There's a lot of people doing bad things in Bresson, but there is that
self-interested, dishonesty.
Yeah.
I mean, all the sins are represented.
But it's the spectrum, because then you have innocence and grace and great strength of character. You have people who are very who have a lot of pride, whether for good or bad. And so I think that also there's like the human spirit underneath that is represented in every film.
Really, again, that predestination. It's choices. Every time they're making a choice. In Crime and Punishment, he chooses to be a pickpocket. He's choosing to be a criminal. Can he, be this kind of Uberman? Can he get there? And everyone in here, they don't have to lie in court. They don't have to pass the note. The father could have given him more allowance, but he holds back. We don't have a story or a movie if the father gives him a little more allowance. He decides not to. So and but what a
kid spending the money really than the dad not giving it is what I thought.
bunch of spoiled
And I think
little
that's
middle-class French kids.
Well, I just thought that's
Norbert.
It's so ironic that because
Norbert, be off, Norbert.
the French are like booing him, but we're sitting here like, oh, this is so totally French. It's just completely ironic, and I could see why, because he's attacking like their society,
The
their
heart of the
propriety.
Lars and I love to talk about this. When you watch a lot of art films, you'll notice that they are hated in their country of origin.
Always, yeah, that's one.
Prophet's not accepted in his hometown.
Yeah, Tarkovsky. Back to Tarkovsky again, always.
You're playing on Sunday.
Speaking of Tarkovsky, yeah, there's a showing of The Mirror on Sunday afternoon. Jeff Dyer is giving an intro. Is Jeff here?
Who's showing The Mirror? Is it
At the Alamo Ritz.
at the Ritz? Great. Okay.
But come see our Burglar, the Belmondo film. Come see that Friday. And then
We'll help you plan your weekend.
you
Friday
can go to,
here.
you can go to The Mirror on
Sunday, The Mirror.
with Jeff at
And
which is another
speaking of planning,
total masterpiece. And what a beautiful, beautiful print. Come on. That is this doesn't exist anywhere on planet Earth tonight except here. That Bresson has an audience of what, 175 people?
are you going to take it home into your living room and watch it 8 more times?
Yeah. No, that's what you miss about the old 16mm days. You could really watch it at home. Can't quite do that in 35.
I was gonna say, I was like
Yeah.
3. I thought well, yeah, 16.
No, back in the early days, we were all 16 millimeter.
So next
So-
week we're taking off
Yeah.
for
No
Cine
film
Las Americas, which is a wonderful
All right, that's
festival
wonderful.
that will happen here at the Marchesa. So
Yes.
come to Cine Las Americas. And then the week after, I hope you remember because I don't what you guys are showing because I'm not here. Jojo? Oh, it's Jojo the
Yeah.
Dancer. Okay.
Richard Pryor's personal autobiographical art film of the 80s. I'm serious. It's a beautiful personal film from the greatest comedian ever.
So that's a big jump from L'Argent to Jojo the Dancer, but it's
Always a
all
big
about
jump.
the 80s, 84 to 86.
We took a big jump from, I mean, in a way, it's a big jump from Lynch to here. They're all big jumps, but they're beautiful. You know, so.
So Pickpocket, what's your other Bresson recommendation before we leave, or
God.
favorite Bresson moment,
Balthazar.
something else
Oh,
we
gosh, so many.
leave everyone to go
Escape.
discover.
Okay, we're due a full Bresson retrospective.
We are.
Holly, and that's there was one going around a few years ago. They had some prints, so we just have to get those over here. Within the year, we'll be showing them.
So instead of you getting a homework
Full.
assignment, I'm getting a homework assignment.
Yeah,
So,
that's a Holly. I did it a long
all right,
time
thanks
ago.
everyone for
Thank
coming.
you so much for
We'll
being
see
here.
you
This was
Friday,
awesome.
Sunday, and at Jojo the Dancer. Thank you.